For all those who remember these guys. Easily one of the heaviest deathcore bands ever. They were a big part of the MySpace era, but I guess the question is, how did they get there? What's their story? That's what we're gonna find out today. So my friend, as usual, take a cup of coffee, cigarette, a Big Mac, whatever you feel like as we explore the King Conquer MySpace era. Real quick, before starting the video, if you didn't join our Discord yet, the link is in the description. We also have a brand new live podcast every single week, featuring amazing artists from all the bands you like. And talking about that, I wanted to say thank you to Chris Whited, who was kind enough to share all the King Conquer story with me. And now, let's do this. So the band was formed in 2002 by Chris and his brother Adam in Naples, Florida. And at first, it wasn't called King Conquer. It was called Dark Skies Has Fallen. During their first year as a band, they completed the lineup, they played some shows locally. Chris actually told me that their very first show was in a skate park. This isn't the actual skate park they played, and it was just for context. Moving on. A few years later, in 2004, the band actually released 2 EPs. The first one was called Collapsing in the Aftermath of Our Coexistence. Alright, I know it wasn't a very long preview like I usually do in my videos, but since this EP was apparently recorded with only one mic and one take, the sound isn't really ideal. It's still cool because it gives you the context and the vibe they were aiming for. Like for me, it was kind of reminding me of bands like Norma Jean or Underoath. It was more metalcore sounding than deathcore at the time. And then, not too long after the release, they went in a much better studio called Crystal Sound, a very suiting name since the sound was way better. And then they released a brand new EP called A Switchblade Serenade. Cool, right? I mean, I really had fun listening to this one. I kind of felt like it was a mix of like early The Devil Wears Prada, mixed with maybe some As Blood Runs Black. I mean, the sound was very early MySpace era. The breakdowns were pretty simple, yet very efficient, blending perfectly with the amazing, aggressive riffs. The vocals are very good in my opinion, especially the high-pitched vocals. Very early Bring Me the Horizon sounding. I mean, to say that their second EP is an improvement would be an understatement. I think it's very clear how much they improved and they evolved as a band. And believe it or not, on top of releasing 2 EPs, they were also playing shows. then, in early 2005, they decided to change their name for A Horror Story. And they went back in the studio again. I'm telling you, these guys were not losing time. Which brings us to the release of a brand new EP called Conquer.
I wish I could make you see. We will burn down the rebel army. So put down your guns and fight beside me. Roll out and all. You have something enough to live and not try everything. Do you make a way? I killed that fucking all. Yeah. I tried so down again. I'm going down again at night.
Super cool EP. To me, it was kind of similar to a Switchblade Serenade, except it was more polished and refined, if you will. It was also more technical and even more hardcore sounding. It makes sense, you know. Chris told me they were coming from the hardcore scene way more than the metal scene. So the hardcore roots were a big part of their identity. The As Blood Runs Black classical kind of riffs, as I like to call them, really sounded cool and catchy. I don't know, there's something about this classic vocal tone with these sounds. It's something you don't really hear anymore, and I miss that, to be honest. So as they were getting closer to the sound they wanted, you could tell they were getting more confident live. And so they kept doing their thing, playing live, writing some music together, until they heard some new upcoming bands like All Shall Perish, who really sounded like death metal but with more groove, kind of a new tone, a new energy. Something that would be later called deathcore, but didn't really existed at the time. So then they felt inspired to do something, you know, more brutal, more heavy, while keeping their hardcore roots. Which brings us to 2006, when the band officially became King Conquer and released a brand new EP called Welcome to Hell. Hell yeah, it's a different band, right? I mean, first, it was the introduction of their new vocalist, Jared Smith, who did a fantastic job on the EP. I mean, his low-pitched vocals were super gnarly and brutal, But if I'm honest, I kind of missed the high-pitched crazy vocals previously featured on their material. That being said, the whole vibe, this whole new King Conquer thing, it was an evolution. It's kind of like if they became a deathcore band at this point, and it was awesome. So with their new vibe, their new lineup, this new energy, they played some shows together, and they were killing it. Also, around that time, they were supposed to release the DVD, apparently, but I couldn't find it anywhere. I'm not even sure if they released it. I forgot to ask Chris. I still think it's cool that they were doing that. So then they kept doing their thing, playing live, writing music, until unfortunately Jared had to quit the band. So they decided to do a little video to announce the new available position online.
Sup, it's King Conquer here. We're looking for a new lead singer. Gotta be over the age of 18, willing to drop everything, gotta be willing to move, gotta have your own transportation.
The thing is, even if they played with some amazing vocalists live, little did they know that they would have to actually steal a vocalist from another band. Let me explain. At the time, when they played shows with a band called We Shot the Sheriff, and Chris heard those gnarly, monster, demonic kind of vocals, he just knew that James Mislow was the absolute right fit for the band. Chris told me that directly after the show, he went to talk to James, and apparently he told him that King Conquer was doing very well and they were getting a lot of record label deals left and right, and they were in the process of choosing the right deal for them, which wasn't true. They had no deals back then. But Chris was very confident and he knew they needed James in the band. I mean, sometimes you have to fake it until you make it, right? So fortunately, James accepted, and alongside their new guitar player, Tony, they finally had the perfect lineup for King Conquer. And that's when King Conquer officially released one of the heaviest EPs of all time called Decomposing Normality. Alright, you know that in every video I'm making, there's always this defining moment, an album or EP or something that the band does that changed everything, right? Decomposing Normality was exactly that for King Conquer. Even today, every time I hear the name King Conquer, the first thing coming to mind is this EP, this sound, this heaviness, this incredible, insane bestiality kind of vibe. I'm telling you, when Decomposing Normality was released, it was the heaviest thing anybody ever heard. I would even argue that they redefined what heavy meant. One of the main reasons for that, I believe, was James' vocals. So unique and so brutal and monster sounding. I mean, not theatrical like what you hear today. I'm talking real raw heaviness. It just couldn't sound any better. Musically, the perfect mixture of hardcore and brutal death metal together that kind of makes you want to break something or punch something, literally. It was perfect. I mean, the song Digitally Transmitted Disease is the perfect example of what deathcore should be. I have nothing negative to say about this EP. It was raw, brutal, well executed, everything you wanted at the time. Fortunately for King Conquer, Chris was able to keep his promise he made to James, because after the release, in 2010, they got signed by Mediascare Records. Apparently, Chris sent the EP directly to the label, and they were impressed, obviously. The thing is, they wanted to hear the band perform live, like most labels before signing a deal. It's one thing to record something sick, it's another thing to perform it live. And so, they went to a King Conquer show, and believe me, they were not disappointed.
If you don't jump, you're not fucking cool. Everybody fucking jumps. Everybody fucking jumps. This song's called Digitally Transmitted Disease.
So yeah, once they got signed, it was a big milestone for the band. Being on the same label as Suffocate, As Blood Runs Black, The Ghost Inside, and tons of amazing other bands like that. After all these years working hard together, trying different things, performing live, working hard, it was finally paying off. And talking about working hard, Chris' brother Adam had a lot of health problems, like serious health problems. And even then, he was part of every show, every tour, everything they did as a band that he possibly could be part of. He never gave up, and I thought it was worth mentioning that without Adam, King Conquer would never have been what it was. I'm saying that because unfortunately, a few years later, he passed away. And I think it's important to take a moment and say rest in peace, and thank you for all the amazing music you made. You won't be forgotten. But for now, let's go back to the story. So when the band signed with the label, the deal was that the same year, they would go back in studio and release a full-length album. I mean, it's understandable. After 5 EPs, you kind of want to release a full-length album, right? So guess what? The label accepted, and in only 4 weeks, they wrote the entire album together. And yes, when they were in studio, they did a little update.
This is day 2 at Sonic Assault Studios. We're recording our full-length America's Most Haunted. We're inside the control room with Charlie and Phil at Sonic Assault Studios, and now we're trying to level and mix drum stuff.
Awesome, right? But what's even more awesome is that apparently Chris recorded all the drum parts in only 9 hours. It's insane. I don't think you understand how much time it takes usually. I didn't even know it was possible. Unfortunately, right before releasing their album, they had to fire their guitar player Brody because of some disagreement they had at the time, leaving only Tony and John on guitar duty. Yes, they had 3 guitar players at the time, but before moving on, I also wanted to say rest in peace to Brody because he also died a few years ago. So on behalf of the whole deathcore community, I'm gonna say thank you for all the amazing music you made. But yeah, to go back to the story, after all these years, King Conquer was finally ready to drop the full-length album. So in November 2010, the band finally released their album called America's Most Haunted. Alright, let's do this. First, I want to say, it's a very good album. Do I like it as much as Decomposing Normality? No. Is it because I always prefer EPs over albums? Yes and no. You see, to me, as good as it was, because it sounded more mature and it was an evolution for sure, but since it was a little more polished, it sounded a little less in your face. And I know I'm nitpicking here, so don't get me wrong, it's an amazing album. It was just missing a little rawness they had in the previous record. Musically, it was super well executed, crisp back vocals on hardcore parts, James' bestiality over amazing breakdowns and brutal death metal riffs. And by the way, I think the breakdowns featured on this album are some of the best they ever wrote. So yeah, overall, it's an amazing album. I also think it's really impressive, considering they had no time to write it almost. So yeah, well done, King Conquer. I believe with this album, the band proved to the entire world that not only were they super talented, but also they were ready for the big leagues, you know, playing with the biggest bands in the scene, which is exactly what they did. They started promoting the album live, and it was crazy. Unfortunately, not too long after touring, Tony had to quit the band. It was difficult for him, you know, money-wise. Yeah, in case you didn't know, most deathcore bands made very little money or no money at all. It might seem like the dream for a lot of people, being a rock star, going on tour, and of course there are amazing moments that comes with that. And I'm not saying it's not worth it, I'm just saying the reality of it is very difficult. The more I'm making videos, the more I realize how much work it really takes. So yeah, when you see band members quitting, it's not that surprising. It must be difficult taking all those risks without even knowing if you're gonna make it. But talking about taking the risk, on a more positive note, a few years later, Tony ended up being a very successful YouTuber. So yeah, Tony, if you're watching this, I think it's awesome. So now, before going back on tour, obviously King Conquer had to find a new guitar player. So they hired Derek Captain, a very good friend of Chris, who's very talented and completed the lineup perfectly. Even if the band was going through a lot during those years, they were still thriving, getting more popular in the scene. Chris told me they were being featured on big bands' top 8 on MySpace, like Whitechapel, Oceanos, bands like that. King Conquer was finally recognized and respected as an official professional deathcore band. After all those years of hard work and dedication, it was well deserved. Then they made an official video for the song 6-Gallon Gasoline Stomach. By the way, I love how every single member of King Conquer looked straight up like hardcore dudes. No scene hair, no gimmick, nothing like that. They all look like they would destroy everyone in a mosh pit. Anyway, so in 2010-2011, the band was featured on big tours with bands like Suffocate, Blind Witness, and as you probably guessed, they were killing it live themselves. So yeah, after touring for a while, they went back in the studio, they recorded a brand new album, they were ready to release it in early 2012, but then, when they were about to release it, they couldn't, because the label couldn't pay for it.
I declare bankruptcy!
So instead of dropping their new album, they kept touring and doing their thing, sending back and forth messages with the label, hoping for a release date. I mean, imagine that. You go in studio, you do super intense work, and just when you're ready to release it to the world, you can't. Because your label that you have a deal with just don't pay for your album. So yeah, it sucked. But at least King Conquer got to play their new songs live, and it was super well received by the fans. During the summer, they did a little tour vlog. You know how much I like those.
Coming back from me, Auschwitz gas chamber full of Zyklon B.
Count of 3, do or say something cool. Both of you. 1, 2, 3. King Conquer!
I want to be a Jonas brother.
For what it's worth, I think it's awesome that the band kept promoting themselves, kept playing tours, being patient and positive. I guess to sum up 2012, King Conquer mostly toured, promoting new songs, trying to get a release date from their label. And in 2013, they kept going, played shows, they were killing it live. They started to get featured on cool things like Bus Invader. Until, unfortunately, John Bird was apparently too much to handle. He was doing a lot of drugs. He was negative about the whole situation with the band. He even started being mean with other bands. So one day Chris just had enough and he kicked John out of the band while they were touring. And before you think it's harsh, I met Chris He's a very good dude, super patient and kind. So believe me, if he did that, it was well deserved. I mean, as much as you want to be patient and kind and give everyone a chance, sometimes you have to be a leader and stand up for your people and protect them. And I think this is exactly what he did. So then, literally one day after what happened, they did a show with only one guitar player, Derek, and Chris told me how freeing and liberating it really was for the band. He even told me that they never had this much fun in years. To me, it makes a lot of sense because it only takes one negative person to bring down a whole group of people. I'm sure you went through that. Like, we all had some co-workers that made our lives miserable and almost makes you want to quit.
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way.
But yeah, unfortunately, even if they had a good time, not too long after that, Chris and James actually quit King Conquer. At this point, it was just too much for them, you know? So with Derek and Adam as the only remaining members in King Conquer, the band finally released their new album called 1776. Super good album. For me, it's kind of the logical sequel to America's Most Haunted. They had the same old King Conquer vibe, except it was a little more hardcore and bouncy, which I could be wrong, but I think was a way to distance themselves from other bands, because back then, most deathcore bands were sounding a little more death metal, losing their hardcore sides. I think King Conquer did the exact opposite, fully assuming their hardcore roots, which was awesome, by the way, especially considering what happened to deathcore a few years later. The only unfortunate thing about this album really is the release date. It should have been released in 2012, not in 2013 towards the end of the year. It doesn't make any sense. To me, it's a very big L on Mediascare Records. I don't know. I guess I'm just curious to know what would have happened if it was released earlier. I don't think Chris and James would have quit. Maybe the impact of the album would have changed a lot of things. But yeah, I guess we'll never know. Then, later during the year, John Bird was back in King Conquer, which brings us to what I would call the John incident. Apparently, he had access to the band's page somehow, and he ripped off a lot of fans. He was asking them for money in exchange of exclusive stuff, but he basically just took the money and left. And now, I don't want to defend him or anything, I just want to say, I've seen what drugs can do to a person, and at a certain level, you don't even think straight. You're not even yourself. And it can lead to very upsetting and unfortunate events. Case in point, a few years later, unfortunately, John Bird also passed away because of his addiction. So again, I know things were delicate with the fans, with King Conquer and all that, but I think no one deserves a tragic end like that. So I'm still gonna say rest in peace and thank you for all the amazing music. So to go back to the story, after the fallout and everything that happened, King Conquer actually came back together and they decided to give back to the fans. They organized a crowdfunding, and with the money they were able to re-release Decomposing Normality with some bonus content and new art. and they were able to give back to the fans who got ripped off.
Yeah, and the guy that you were referring to, his name is Nathan. He's a good friend of ours, and just like out of the blue, just hit us up and was like, "Yo, we're gonna start this crowdfunder and just get all these people involved to pay for this album." And like we were kind of like skeptical it even work, you know, and then ended up making a lot of money to be able to help all the people out that ended John, our old guitar player, ripped off. So
wow, that's awesome.
It worked out really well. Yeah.
I will say on behalf of everybody, like I remember that going down, what you guys are doing. I will say I have tons of respect for you guys for doing that for your fans. A lot of bands kind of just like drop it and kind of just like be like, well, it happened, you know, we can't do anything about it. You guys actually put forth the work to make up for all that stuff. And so on behalf of everybody watching, you know, thank you guys for doing that for everybody. And so.
Yeah, no problem.
So
yeah, you gotta. If we didn't do that, I don't think we'd still have the fan base that we do right now. You know what I mean? You can't just let people get ripped off and then keep going, just act like nothing happened. You know what I mean? You gotta do something.
So yeah, even if it wasn't the best circumstances, it did reunite the band. And the same year, they did an awesome tour together. They even released a brand new song called That Bed. And that was pretty much it for King Conquer. Things kind of ended up naturally, I guess. On the other end, Chris told me he never stopped making music. He was being paid in a cover band at some point, and he started learning how to record music, which is how he met his new amazing band, Buddy Snatcher. Back then, he even had a side project called Lost Fortune, in which he was the vocalist. It's so cool that Chris never stopped making music. No matter how hard it was, no matter the challenges, the difficulties along the way, he was holding up to his passion, his purpose, and I think it's probably why he's so successful today. And this, my friend, was the story of King Conquer. As usual, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Join our Discord if you didn't already. It's free. But most importantly, don't miss our live podcast because in a few weeks, Chris is going to be our guest. So now, with all that being said, I'm going to stop talking. I'll see you in the next one.